Hello folks, old Buster coming to you again. We've talked about the Presidential Corps so much in all these stories, the later part of them anyway, latter part of them. And this story is how it all came about. This is about the Presidential Corps, Intrigue. Chapter 1. Fighting for his life and his betrothed Lorraine, Jesse Dalton McBride jettisoned himself from the melee of knives, guns, fists, and amid shouts of "kill them," rolled on his back and found the .41 stainless steel auto mag that had been bludgeoned from his hand. Lorraine was ensconced in plastic wrap and hanging from the overhead crane in the warehouse and was out of the line of fire. Semi-conscious but still coherent enough to hear his instructions to swing out as far as she could and grasp the dangling cable next to the wharf. Dalton snapshot two of the horde of misfits that guarded the prize of the Muslim nation, correcting his aim to level headshots to three more of the radical jihads, left him with only one bullet. With uncanny senses of reflex, Dalton grasped the Walther PPK in the ankle holster on his right leg and slipped the throwing knife from the scabbard on his left wrist. Almost simultaneously, Dalton threw the knife that embedded itself in the left eye of a hulking raghead about to dispatch him with a nasty-looking sword and shot one brandishing an AK-47 in the throat. Two more of the bad guys were taken out on the way to the crane to lower Lorraine. As he released the hoist, he found a razor knife that was left on the table in the packing department. Quickly he sliced through the plastic and freed Lorraine's hands and pulled the duct tape from her mouth. He shouted for her to drop down to the water on the cable she had caught with her feet and get to the racing boat tied to the dock as fast as she could. After three more kills, Dalton ran to the top floor of the warehouse, diverting the attention away from Lorraine. As he was about to jump from the window to the murky depths below, a gun barrel was placed behind his ear. The Muslim told him in broken English that he was going to die. "Infidel," he cried. "Allah be praised, you American pig, you die now." Just as his finger was tightening on the trigger, a red dot appeared on the Muslim's forehead, and the slight whisper of the bullet killed the Muslim and sent him into the chipper shredder below. William Devane Olson, operative code name Executioner, rounded the corner and yelled for Dalton to follow him. A construction debris chute was in the window of the next room and spilled out onto the dock. Both men successfully escaped to the racing boat with Lorraine at the helm. The finished port of Hamina left far behind, and with the fine mist of spray off the bow, Dalton and Devane knew the end was in the beginning and their journey had just begun. The team: Jason Dalton McBride, date of birth 9/14/1973, adventurer extraordinaire, Juris Doctor, University of Alabama, Harvard University, graduated magna cum laude 1993, contract operative, code name Avenger, expert in gung fu martial arts, weapons, .41 auto mag and throwing knives, demolition, pilot, fixed wing and helicopter, jet, and fluent in English, Russian, Spanish, Czech, Arabic, German, French, Italian, Manx, and Scottish Gaelic. McBride works under presidential order only and is engaged to Lorraine Rose Allison, Deputy Director of Intelligence, Department of Defense. Resides in Mountain Brook Castle, Birmingham, Alabama, and McBride Castle, Edinburgh, Scotland. Mensa IQ 172. Lorraine Rose Allison McBride, date of birth 7/13/1976, psychologist, PhD, international affairs, PhD, Wellesley, graduated magna cum laude 1996, CIA intelligence agent 1997 to 2000, Department of Defense 2001 to present, deputy director appointed 2007, Kendo martial arts black belt, sniper qualified, small arms specialist, fluent in English, Spanish, German, Russian, French, Italian, pilot, fixed wing, and jet. Mensa IQ 180. William Devane Olson, date of birth 3/13/1965, Colonel, U.S. Marine Corps, University of Arkansas, graduated summa cum laude, 1986, major, chemistry, minor, physics, Mensa IQ 162, Special Operations Intelligence Specialist, reports to Secretary of Defense, Extreme Prejudice Operative, code name Executioner. Fluent in English, Spanish, Russian, German, Arabic, and Finnish. Black belt in karate, kempo, kickboxing, judo, pencak silat. His knife of choice is EK Commando FS MK2. Hiram Holmes, Special Envoy for the President of the United States, Director of Operations for the Presidential Corps, direct responsibility for the team, coordinates all missions for the President, all information classified, eyes only, President. The only known facts on Hiram Holmes: drinks Old McBrayer whiskey, red wine, and coffee. Does not like beef or corn, detests car washes and litter. Unconventional, brilliant, and witty. Note: no recent photographs available. Chapter 2. Director Hiram Holmes directed each one of his visitors to sit in their personalized seat. He wanted each one of them to be comfortable. They had a lot to talk about. This is off the record, off the books. Organization known as the Presidential Corps had unlimited funds and unlimited authority. Take no prisoners was the motto unless directed by the director. The mission was successful as evidenced by the team's presence in his office. Inwardly, the director was extremely partial to this group, but could never show the feelings he had for them. The tough and sometimes seemingly unfair demeanor and exterior of the director was only a ruse. The old saying of, "you can't judge a book by its cover," certainly held true with him. He went to bat for these three with his reputation, money, and resources as well as his life. No other person but the president knew of the activities of the team, and it was so closely a guarded secret that fail-safe procedures were in place. If known, knowledge of the team would undermine the very fabric of the country and chaos would be unleashed around the globe. By virtue of this meeting, the mission to render the prize useless was a success, but not completed, but only continued. The hard, wet work was still yet to come. The prize, an unknown weapon so powerful it would annihilate the entire planet. The most integral guidance and ignition system components were completely destroyed by nano-anaerobic isotopes placed in the crate by Dalton and Lorraine before being captured by the Muslim guards. Removing a screw and injecting the isotopes was easy with a syringe. However, the most crucial information and blueprints were still at large. The scientists had created the prize were all dead. They were executed by the respective governments involved: Russia, Iran, Syria, North Korea, and China. Each country had a pact to join together to take control of the world and create a new world order. To do this, gigantic sums of money were required. Funding was thought to come from each of the governments, and not one of them trusted the other, so no one government knew who contributed or who didn't. The real power behind this world takeover was elusive. That was the final stage of the mission, but first the team had to dismantle each faction that supported the takeover in each government. The one positive in this whole mess was the support from within each country. Reasonable men and women that knew that peace and the welfare of their country could only be achieved by a grassroots resistance movement to aid the mission, code name Freedom. A document implicating the parties of each country was attached to the blueprints of the prize, and to capture them from the person or persons orchestrating this debacle was the primary goal. Possession of the documents meant domination and control over all of the countries that wanted to overthrow all world governments. To add insult to injury, in this power struggle of the world was a fly in the ointment. Russia and Iran made a side deal and let one scientist that was low level in the design of the firing mechanism of the prize live, unknown to the other countries. Well, this expatriate from Kiev was detained in the far reaches of the Gobi Desert. The Chinese didn't have a clue what was in their backyard. Well, after a light brunch and workout in the basement gym, the team reassembled. The director gave the details of the startup of the operation, but after that they were on their own. Support would be provided as requested, and the team would act individually and collectively. Communication would be on a need-to-know basis, but no less than 24 hours. Even though the Secretary of Defense had oversight of his agents, he was not in the loop of the operation. Under direct presidential order, he was to relinquish all control over Colonel Olson and Deputy Director Allison. McBride was under presidential orders and was to be directed by the director. Special communications satellites were available to the team and were 100% secure. Top secret weaponry and advanced technology was also provided by a special unit that answered only to the director. However, they did not know of the team. When it was necessary to have one of the team confer with the sci-fi unit, the director would simply order them to provide what was necessary or requested for the individual. No questions asked. Avenger would leave immediately to Russia. Executioner would follow on the first flight to Baghdad and then cross into Iran. Lorraine would remain behind to offer support until she was needed to assist on the mission. Money, passports, contacts, and disguises were provided and the team separated for final preparations. The director and the team agreed to meet at the club for dinner and drinks before departure. Of course, Dalton and Lorraine would stay over at the club, but Devane opted to leave with the director at 10:30 p.m. to their respective unknown residences. Devane was very private also, but did have somewhat of a life. Lynn had been his sweetheart since high school and understood what he was giving up for his country, for her, to be free. When he was finished with the mission, he would always go to her and she would always welcome him with open arms. They were secretly married and had one son, Mark. He was in college and on the wrestling team. He didn't know what his father did for a living after he retired from the Marines and only knew that his dad was in international acquisitions and was at home and away for extended periods of time. Mark was a spitting image of his father with his mother's personality. He never told his dad that he longed for a career in the military and planned to enlist for officers' training school after graduation. Goodbyes could be final. Each one of them made the best of the time they had with the ones they loved. To a person in the team, they all said they would do it all over again and never have any regrets. The mission was afoot and time was critical. If the Russians and Iranians played into the powers' hands and completed their plot, the world as we know it would be forever changed. They meant to stop that. Chapter 3. Dalton arrived in Moscow and was taking a taxi to the train station for the long ride to Kiev. He was disguised as a much older man. His own mother wouldn't have recognized him. He always had to concentrate on his gait when in disguise, and he, as most people do, has a distinctive stride in his walk. The one thing you can count on is a person's walk. It is the hardest thing to disguise. Only the best in the business can pull it off, so a trained professional won't detect the telltale sign of who they are. Dalton also had papers that identified him as an engineer for the Department of Transportation. He was going to Kiev to discuss the new super train for Amtrak and the possibility of manufacturing components for it. His passport, credit card, Social Security card, and driver's license all showed him to be Jimmy Joe Emery of Demopolis, Alabama, at 6'3" and a solid 214 pounds. Dalton made a formidable warrior in the business of death. Thick, coal-black hair with a bit of a curl, hazel eyes with 20/10 vision, aquiline nose, and a frame like an oak tree. Dalton could exist in survival mode for extended periods of time or melt into the background as a common working man, but could never escape the attention of women. He was handsome to a fault, and his very presence and aura attracted women of every ilk. He had a way with him that belies the romantic in his soul, and it just exuded from him like the smell of barbecue from his home down south. You wouldn't think Dalton was a stone-cold killer, but that was his stock in trade. Not that Dalton didn't have religious beliefs in God, Jesus, and the Holy Ghost, but his sense of duty and patriotism overshadowed that and in some ways complemented his deadly skills. He protected the innocent and the rights and freedom of every human being, and that demanded his total commitment to that cause, even in the taking of life. They made the choice for him, and he had no alternative but to use his superb abilities to thwart their attempts to control, intimidate, torture, maim, and rape the innocents that could not defend themselves. Dalton, while in the role of the Avenger, could separate his actions that would normally damage any person's psyche. Lorraine was a big part in keeping him grounded, and she had a large part in the reason he continued as a contract agent. Dalton had to operate unimpeded, with no rules but his rules, and knew what he did for a living was more than just the money. It was a true calling as a stalwart Spartan against evil, with the blessing of his government and his Creator. As Dalton boarded the train, 3 tough-looking men walked past him in the aisle in his car. He took note of them, and they gave him the once-over, but continued down the aisle as he entered his compartment. His section was in a Pullman sleeper, and the European-type rail car with individual compartments allowed him complete privacy. The train was well on its way, and the conductor had taken his ticket, and the steward had taken his dinner order and had brought him a single malt scotch, Macallan, and soda with a twist of lime. The terrain changed from the lowlands to mountains, and the vistas were incredible. Snow began to fall heavily, and the chill in the air was welcomed by Dalton, and he found a few peaceful moments to contemplate the upcoming events in the morning. In an instant, Dalton was out of his seat, and the first thug took a hand strike to the throat as his compartment door crashed open. The opening was too small for all 3 of the thugs to come in at once, but the onslaught to overtake him was fast and furious as they pushed one another through the opening. With the first one down, he drove a foot into the sternum as the second thug lunged at him with a knife. Dalton was an expert at knife fighting, and the karambit knife the thug was wielding had flaws in its use that allowed defensive action, and he used that defense to eliminate the threat of harm. In any knife fight, the rule was to go in fast, cut, and get out fast. This bum didn't have what it takes to fight someone in Dalton's class. The thrust was parried with the pin cat salat move, and Dalton's MK2 fighting knife sprang into his hand as if by magic. The perfect stab to the spinal cord killed him instantly. The third thief began to fall as he was pushing his partner in crime through the door. Dalton felt the foul-smelling breath of the thug as he grabbed Dalton's leg as he fell to the floor. The thug had an ice pick and was about to stab Dalton when a crashing elbow met his jaw. His head snapped back, and Dalton was on him and quickly subdued his would-be attacker. Dalton used a technique to put the man to sleep for a few minutes and closed his door quickly. He then opened his window and shoved the first 2 men out into the awaiting darkness. The third thief was awakened and interrogated by Dalton to find out they were trying to rob the older man that was alone. Dalton was satisfied that their attack had nothing to do with his mission and gave the man a choice: jump from the train or die. Dalton followed the thief to the end of the car and opened the door to the outside, then pushed the man from the train. Dalton went to the men's room and returned to his compartment as if nothing happened. There was no blood to speak of that could mar the cleanliness of the compartment, and after closing the window took a nap. The rest of the journey was uneventful, and he arrived in Kiev at 9:45 a.m. In the meantime, Devane had flown to Baghdad and had crossed into Iran. He didn't encounter any problems in getting to Tehran. Devane had the coloration of a native, and his Arabic was perfect. This allowed him to move freely among the population without detection. He met his contacts supplied by the director, a middle-aged man that had been educated in the United States and knew that his conversion to Western ways and Christianity was the only path to save his country from utter destruction. Rahim drove a battered Toyota 4Runner and took him to a mountain retreat and stronghold with an intricate cave and tunnel system. Here they made the plans for Operation Freedom, and Devane assessed the inventory of weapons, explosives, and manpower to complete this phase of the mission. The plan was to kidnap the Ayman cleric that controlled the liaison with the Russians. The head honcho for the Ivans was due to Tehran at 3 a.m. the following morning. The snatch and grab had to be made smoothly and the interrogation completed quickly to keep the timetable to meet and greet the big farmer that cruelly tortured and executed hundreds of innocent men, women, and children. The rendezvous went according to plan. The side door of the mosque was left ajar by one of Rahim's men and allowed the 6 resistant fighters and Devane and Rahim entry into the basement. The countdown to the end of the prayers began with excited anticipation of the arrival of the Imam. He would cross over to his quarters through the basement, and there he would be apprehended, hopefully without detection. Just as Devane saw the Imam come into view, one of the followers rushed in to tell him of unauthorized persons in the building. At that time, an alarm was sounded, and the Imam personal guards appeared. The ensuing battle was short-lived, but the body count was high. Devane only had a scratch from a sword, but Rahim suffered a flesh wound to the thigh. 10 guards and the follower lay dead in a confined area next to the stairs. 4 of the fighters were dead, 1 decapitated from a lethal scimitar expertly used by the Imam himself. The sound of automatic gunfire would bring legions of police, military, and followers of the Imam, so haste was paramount to escape. Devane and Rahim shoved the Imam into a waiting truck while the remaining 2 fighters covered their escape route. Devane got in back of the truck while Rahim and the driver occupied the front. The remainder of the men took off on motorcycles. The warehouse in the market district served as a safe house for the interrogation. At first, the Imam would not talk. Then pig's blood was sprinkled on the naked man along with the menses from a woman. Next came simple but effective torture. Clipping 1 finger at a time would make him sing the tune Devane wanted. Sure enough, after the first pinky went, and the threat of castration, the Imam divulged more information than was even thought that he would have. He gave up names, places, times, and dates. Moreover, he had knowledge of the Syrian connection and a clue to the document and blueprints for the weapon. After all the information that could possibly attain from the Imam, Rahim quietly slit his throat. All wounds were dressed, and another contingent of Rahim's fighters met them at the entrance to the airport at 2 a.m. Arrangements had been made by Rahim for them to pose as airport employees and local police. They would board the Russian plane before Comrade Roskovich the plane to meet with the Imam. Devane's plan was to kill the pilot and co-pilot, and he would fly with Rahim and his men to Syria, and while en route, interrogate Roskovich. Surprisingly, the hijack went off without a hitch. The only passengers were Roskovich and his assistant that was not a combatant. He too had information to divulge and readily gave it to Devane on his first request. Roskovich was another matter, however. Before arriving in Al-Quds, answers had to be extracted from this piece of trash. Devane administered the truth serum and waited for it to take effect. That plus the glass tube in the penis did the trick. Roskovich knew the drill with the glass tube. He too learned it from the North Vietnamese. When struck with a hammer, unbelievable pain was experienced and a slow death ensued. Roskovich wanted to make a deal to go to the U.S. and have asylum, and Devane agreed. Roskovich wanted confirmation from Devane's boss before he would tell all. Well, Devane powered up his sat cell, called the director. The director told Roskovich he supported whatever Devane said or did. The Russian turkey maker of torture gave up all the details of his Syrian counterparts and confirmed the Imam's information with additional facts of Kremlin involvement. The 9 members of the ruling class, royal family, and Islamic clerics were to meet in a bathhouse in Al-Quds in the afternoon 2 days from now and plot their strategy on the worldwide takeover. While en route, and Roskovich a happy camper, Devane killed him with a painful but effective thrust from his stiletto to the abdomen. Gagged and tied to a seat in the back, he died slowly. The assistant was displaced quickly with a broken neck as he slept in his seat. With only 2 days to prepare, Devane and Rahim decided there was no other information they needed from the Syrians. The plan went off without any difficulty, and the bathhouse was wired with enough explosives to level a mountain. At precisely 2:48 p.m., Devane pressed the remote control and obliterated the bathhouse, an untouchable 9. Escape was in progress as the Syrian military was left scratching their butts trying to figure out what happened. Devane left for Beijing, and Rahim and his men parachuted into their mountain stronghold with heartfelt thanks for liberating his people from the threat of tyranny and domination. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, the office, Lorraine and the director were making plans to extricate the team from China. Backup scenarios were put in place to cover any contingency. The director and Lorraine both knew that Avenger and Executioner would make their own plans for escape, but alternatives would always be in place if needed. A last-minute phone call from Avenger brought Lorraine out of her chair and hurrying to make arrangements to fly to Moscow. Executioner was contacted and told to sit on his heels in Beijing until Avenger contacted him. Chapter 4. In Kiev, Dalton learned from his contact, Alana Petrov, that all traces of the prize had disappeared off the map. But she had learned through her sources that a meeting was to take place under the Kremlin within the week. The exact time was not known, but all of the participants were to be in the president's box for the opening of La Traviata. Her cousin was a radio operator for secure transmissions at party headquarters and was ordered to send the message to the Directorate General for the meeting concerning the prize. Well, all members of the association were to be present. 5 men, including the chief of security, would meet in the ultra-secret quiet room under the Kremlin after the performance. The President, Communist Party Chairman, Directorate General of the Military, Chief of Security, and Ambassador to China would be in attendance. Dalton requested that Lorraine meet him in Moscow and dress for dinner and the opera. He found out the opera was opening on the following Saturday and would plan accordingly for the elimination of the association. An encrypted message was decoded by the sci-fi unit that said the meeting at the Kremlin was moved before the operatic performance, and then all members would be in attendance at the opening. This worked out better than Dalton expected. The one Russian he wanted was the chief of security. He was privileged to all information from all members, whereas the others were only informed of what the others wanted them to know, including the president. While awaiting the arrival of Avenger, Executioner went quietly about gathering intel with his contacts in Beijing. He would be ready at a moment's notice for the final phase of the mission. Lorraine arrived in Moscow and went directly to her hotel where Dalton had gotten a room. The suite at the Savoy was classic luxury. It was across from the Bolshoi Theater, and direct access was essential to Dalton's plan. When Dalton arrived dressed in his Armani tuxedo, he was literally dressed to kill. His array of weapons on his body and hidden in his clothing was remarkable, but did not detract from his expertly tailored attire or his dashing and handsome looks. Lorraine stepped out from her dressing room and courteously smiled at Dalton. "Long time no see, stranger," she said, and Dalton was left breathless with her beauty. To know that this woman loved him and chose to be with only him was almost too much to bear. He loved her with a passion only reserved for one in a lifetime and would never subject her to danger if he had anything to do with it. But she had a mind of her own and would do as she pleased whether he liked it or not. She chose this life as well and wanted no more than to share it with him. She wore a black haute couture evening gown that clung to her every curve and highlighted her beauty and sex appeal beyond description. Dalton took her into his arms and kissed her with all the desire in his body and with a tenderness only she would ever know. She returned his kiss and her love in those precious stolen moments and told him not to ruin her makeup. They had work to do. Dalton had met with his contact in Moscow. Romanov was in the Russian mafia. They had infiltrated the Bolshoi under the guise of prop workers for the performance. The box was rigged with explosive charges that would only kill those in the immediate area. Additionally, Romanov's men would be waiting to kill anyone left alive in the box or that tried to escape. Specific orders were given to capture the chief of security for Dalton if he did not already have him in his custody. Normally, the chief of security left early to attend to his duties, but if he did not do that at this time, then he would be paged by an usher to come to the back entrance. Immediately after the second act began, the timer detonated the explosives in the president's box. All persons in the box were killed instantly. The chief of security was lured to the rear entrance by a request for help from a beautiful lady in distress, Lorraine. Dalton was ready and placed a chloroform-laced handkerchief over his nose and mouth. A simple pressure point paralyzed the chief and allowed Dalton to get him into the van, waiting for them outside the door. Both he and Lorraine got in and left and then went back to the Savoy to change and leave and not come back. Dalton left Lorraine at the airport and he went to the location where the chief of security was held. Lorraine made the flight back to the U.S. and reported to the director. When Dalton arrived at the private mental hospital that was used for the interrogation, the chief was already softened up, but he was a tough nut to crack. But Dalton had his ways of extracting information. After 53 hours of torturous interrogation, the chief began to talk. The tactics used on him would be child's play compared to what this man had done. The pain and mutilation he dealt out to thousands was horrendous, inconceivable to the average person. There was no pity in him, no mercy. He was in a class of his own and gave Saddam lessons in cruelty. Chief of Security Ivanovich gave up every secret he held in his brain. A well-placed shot behind the ear dispatched Ivanovich to hell. Dalton learned all he needed to know about the joint venture with the Iranians and all the key players in North Korea and China and the duplicitous, underhanded treachery he was involved in. 2 revelations emerged from this little fact-finding mission. 1, a name, Meyer. 2, misinformation. Now it was up to Dalton and the rest of the team to see what it all meant and to do something about it. Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. Chapter 5. In Beijing, Devane had been busy. The 2 key players from North Korea were to meet with their Chinese counterparts in Beijing under the cover of the Chinese New Year. The North Koreans had to kowtow to the Chinese whether they liked it or not. Kim and his son were idiots, the height of incompetence, and to accomplish a part of world domination in a subservient role would have to be played. But Su Jung and General Mook had ideas of their own since this was accomplished. Unknown nuclear warheads were ready and waiting to take out China and Russia. The launch of 10,000 missiles only required the pressing of a button on either of the two's command. At party headquarters, the celebration began in earnest. No expense was spared for the top officials or their guests. When the concerted effort of the South Korean commandos and Chinese rebel faction of the North descended upon the 14 traitors, all hell broke loose. To a man, the traitors were wiped out without a loss of life to a commando or a rebel. The plan Devane devised and coordinated went off like clockwork. The military came unglued, of course, but the generals in charge stopped all retaliation efforts when they saw their chance to move up the ladder. The Avenger and the Executioner met at the Chinggis Khan International Airport in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia. Neither of them was the worse for wear and was ready to be done with this scheme of world domination. There was enough strife and war as it is, and these traitors to the world needed a real attitude adjustment. Several of their buddies had already bit the dust, and a few more wouldn't hurt in the least. They had to go. The way to get rid of a snake is to cut off his head, and that is exactly what Avenger and Executioner planned to do. A rented 4-wheel drive Land Rover took them to the steppes of Inner Mongolia. Upon reaching the town of Sahanba on the edge of the Mulan hunting grounds, the forested ridges of northern Hebei end and with dramatically abrupt suddenness. The terrain changes to the rolling, treeless steppes were something to behold. This is also the border between Hebei province and Inner Mongolia. At the Ovu, warlords in full battle regalia were in readiness for orders to enter into the battle. There were no tanks or any type vehicles. Horses were the transportation of choice, and the Mongols were expert horsemen and fierce warriors. The United States had a secret pact with the warlords and equipped them with weapons, ammunition, supplies, and money. This was the time to call in a debt, and they willingly anticipated the action. They hated the Chinese regime and their oppression. No one came into their land without them knowing it. The Mongol pipeline had found the abducted scientist from Kiev and was ready to assist in freeing him for the U.S. operatives. In a remote mountain outpost that was a day's journey from the Ovu, the scientist was kept in loose security. He pretty well had the run of the compound because there just wasn't any place to go. Barren and desolate, death was certain if there was an attempted escape. He had no shoes or warm clothing and only enough food for each day. At 4 a.m. the raid commenced. There were only 4 guards to be dealt with, and the extraction went as planned. The guards were nullified without a sound, and the ride back was uneventful until they reached the border. Even though crossing was not in the escape route, Chinese military sent a platoon of soldiers to intercept the group. Now is when the rubber meets the road, so to speak, uttered Devane. Close-in fighting began after the Mongol horsemen completely destroyed the armored vehicles. The mechanized unit could not maneuver in the rough terrain and marshy conditions at that time of year. The Mongols took no prisoners and released all of their hatred and vengeance against the Chinese. Ground forces were fought and defeated as well, but not before inflicting damage to the Mongol warriors. Many were slain with automatic weapons fire and mortars, but eventually the fight ended and not one of the Chinese was left alive. All usable weapons and equipment were recovered by the Mongols and carried back to their villages. At the Ovu, the scientist was questioned. He not only was an innocent, but appalled at what the Russians were attempting to do, but did not know the whole story. Only bits and pieces he overheard gave him an inkling of what was to come. Mikhail Popov was not a design engineer for the firing mechanism of the weapon. Astoundingly, the prize was not the weapon of global devastation. The prize is enslavement and control over the world's population. That part he understood, but there was more, but he could not read the language in the documents he copied. A stranger visited the Russian president and requested his services. The stranger's briefcase was left for 15 minutes in the lab after their conference, and Mikhail had just enough time to copy the 4 pages inside. He did not know what they said, but by the way the meeting went and what he was asked to do, he knew something diabolical was underway that affected the entire planet. The documents were written in German, easy enough for Dalton and Devane to translate. What they read next was absolutely unbelievable. Mikhail is a biogenetic chemist and engineer. His work is known worldwide. He specialized in communicable diseases. The documents laid out the plans for eugenics and mass vaccination to depopulate the world by administering a mutated flu virus from pigs, chickens, and human tissue, reminiscent of the Spanish flu of 1918. Jeffrey Toppenberger was engaged to develop an incurable flu virus from a frozen corpse of a 1918 soldier found in Alaska. He is as much a part of this scheme as anyone else involved and deserves any punishment meted out to him. When injected, a person is also chipped at the same time. The vaccination sterilizes any individual that can bear children, and that is why the young and pregnant are targeted. Several million plastic coffins are already manufactured and in place that can hold 1 to 3 people. The overall result would be control of all governments, all assets, and money, reduction of world population to 500 million, and enslavement of everyone else for the benefit of the elite few. Approximately 1,500 men control the wealth of the world, but one man stands head and shoulders above them all. Helmut Meyer. He is the single most sinister and evil human being alive today. The mastermind for a master race. He has usurped the U.S. presidency with Obama. He has instigated the use of the governments of China, Russia, Syria, North Korea, and Iran to implement his plan of total world control. His plan for the Muslim population is total annihilation with a specific DNA gene to target their race. All of the parties involved in the weapon fiasco were expected to be eliminated by the United States Special Operations Units. This was accomplished on schedule. Avenger and Executioner did not appreciate being used in this demented and demonic plan for Helmut Meyer's grandiose aspiration of playing God. An antidote was perfected before mass vaccination began to protect the elite. The power was to be saved at all costs, but the team had another idea in mind for Meyer and his gang. The weapon was useless and basically a ruse to fuel the project of the power. On the other hand, the world has been brainwashed into thinking that a worldwide pandemic exists and will use that against them. They will literally kill themselves. Meyer must be stopped at all costs, and all of the world leaders come together as one and disavow mass vaccination, and in a combined effort, hunt down and eliminate the power and all of its cohorts. There are no innocents on their side. With a technology unknown to few, Helmut Meyer was located by the crystal in his watch. In his vast retreat with several hundred members of the elite, the Venezuelan plantation provided a sanctuary found no other place in the world. He controlled Chavez. The American president, Obama, was also his pawn, but he never was informed of the presidential court. Until a defender of the Constitution of the United States was elected, Hiram Holmes, the director, was at the helm. The director ordered strike forces from the Intergalactic Federation to totally obliterate the Helmut Meyer plantation and Chavez along with it. The IGF is unknown to any agency but the presidential court. It was first contacted many years ago and is steadfast in protecting this planet. Hard to believe, but true. Meyer tried to outrun the devastation, but he burned to death in his futile attempt to escape. The real power prevailed, good over evil. Epilogue. Dalton and Lorraine were married in June. The director gave her away, and Devane and Lynn threw the reception party to end all parties. Neither Dalton nor Lorraine had any close living relatives, and because of security could not include them even if they'd wanted to do so. The director gave them a wedding present that only he and Devane knew about. A selfish endeavor, to say the least, on his part. A 10,000 square foot home on 80 acres in the panhandle of northern Idaho, equipped with every possible convenience. It was 20 miles from the Canadian border and also bordered an additional 160 acres set back in the mountains. It included a working distillery to produce Oma Brer whiskey and winery. The bunker in the mountain was not visible, and it housed not only the spirits so well liked by the director, but an array of weapons and technology not known by residents of this world. The IGF, Intergalactic Federation, decided that the Presidential Corps should be able to defend itself without outside intervention by them. Therefore, they provided all possible armament and other technological advances at their disposal, plus a hotline and communication system no one knew how to use. After a 2-month honeymoon, the couple returned to move into their new home. Adventure, danger, and suspense await the team of the Presidential Corps. Stay tuned to Buster and the Boys and the Presidential Corps. Y'all have a blessed day. Old Buster signing out.